Hello and welcome to Faith Works Live. It's my joy to be with you, no matter if we have to talk about some difficult topics. We know ultimately that there is a lot of darkness in the world, but the light shines in the darkness and cannot overcome it. So we have an honored guest on our line. We were set to talk about, again, some pretty difficult things today. The reality of human trafficking in our world and I guess all the news and the publicity around Jeffrey Epstein, around the details that have now come out and starting to be publicly known about the sordid, just terribly perverted and darkness is the perfect descriptor for all of that. But it's far from the only case. That high profile situation hopefully will awaken us to the reality of the much deeper travesty of human trafficking and the depravity that's going on that we have to stand up and fight in our time. And Penny Nance from Concerned Women for America is our special guest today. She's written on this topic and she's shining the light into some dark places herself. Thank you, Penny, for being with us and for standing up so strong.
Oh, Rebecca, it's so great to be a part of what you're doing. I'm just so blessed to be on your guest today. You're doing great work. And I'm just always happy to be among believers, born again believers, and women that have a voice in this sphere is really important. So thank you for your great work.
Absolutely. Well, we have to stand up. I mean, if we believe God made us for such a time as this, then we have to use every single day to share His heart, to speak His truth, and to proclaim that hope to a world that is lost and dying, in need of that light. And I think that applies in the political sphere, in the social and cultural spheres. And I want to get to your great article that I will link as well for the podcast listeners. Go to read more about Penny's work. She's got a new column at the Federalist that we're going to talk about. But I think I can't really begin anywhere else other than my own backyard. So it's a bit of a pivot here. But if we're speaking of darkness and looking for hope, right, almost literally in our backyard, or just 15 minutes away from where I live, there was a horrible situation of a high schooler who took guns to his school and decided to use violence against people there that claimed one life, well, two lives, including the shooter. And that fatality was a sixth grader. And the shock that causes for small town Iowa schools, I mean, no one ever expects it will happen in their backyard, but I know that every situation's different, but it just feels so strange, so horrifying, no matter what. And our community is grieving and shocked and looking for answers, looking for hope. And I know, regardless of the specific details of this case, because every situation is going to be a little bit different. But I just wonder if you'd be able to speak, Penny, to these types of situations, because I know that sadly, this is far from the only case. We've seen this over and over again, and it's increasing. It seems like increasing in how common it is. I never heard about this when I was a little kid. My parents were not afraid of this type of thing, and now we have to prepare and we have to grieve these things, and it should not be that case. This evil is so real, and it's targeting our children. And I just wonder for your general thoughts on situations like this and how to equip moms both to be prepared but not to be afraid.
Well, and I don't know that I can. I mean, this is so dark, and where you all are right now, all I can say is I am so sorry, and this is pure evil. And I do feel like, Rebecca, that we're living in a time where there's been a spirit of violence pouring out on this country. I think it's demonic, frankly. You know, I grew up in a really small town, 6,000 people. My little school had our middle school and our high school together, just like that your school there in Iowa, and because it made sense in a little community to have your resources pooled. And so you had a little sixth grader that died. And I mean, it is absolutely demonic. We had a little kindergarten, little first grader, the pastor's daughter, that died in Nashville. And I don't exactly know what to say. I know the left wants to make it about guns, but I grew up when the boys had, like, again, it wasn't this situation growing up. The boys would go hunting and have their hunting rifle in their truck and then come on in to go to school. No one ever worried about, there was no gun violence at school. There just wasn't.
And it wasn't because there were no guns.
Right. There was a
Changed?
lot of guns.
Yeah.
And there was probably more guns among young people at that time. I mean, certainly this was in rural Appalachia, which I think we probably can compare to Iowa. I mean, it's probably very similar communities. And there were the girls went hunting. I mean, it was not an
Sure.
odd thing. And when you grew up, you learned how to use a firearm respectfully, what it was for. People hunted literally for food, and you
Mhm.
ate what you killed. And it was,
Yep.
there was thoughts around this, and also there was protection. And we did not have a lot of, violence in our community. We were all protected. And I am a gun owner. I will tell you, I am. And I write in my book about I was attacked by a stranger on the running path, and it was an attempted rape. I had a stranger that stopped the assault from happening. But after that, I bought a gun because I was having to, I was staying by myself when my husband had traveled, and I couldn't sleep, and I did feel safer, and I know how to use it. And I grew up knowing how to use a gun. So everybody has different thoughts on that. And I know I have sisters in Christ who don't feel the same about that. And I love them and they love me, and we understand each other's thinking on that. But what we're seeing here is something altogether different. And we're seeing, what I'm recognizing is, we saw young people during COVID that were dragged into the dark corners of the internet.
Yeah.
And were given and were abused in those, even though they thought they found community, it was grooming, much like Jeffrey Epstein. They were being groomed by older people, and in some cases bullied. And that's heartbreaking and damaging. And then the thing that also changed is, and listen, I have a son, and I understand the lure of video games, and I'm not anti-video game, but it is something that needs to be watched. If your kid is playing violent video games nonstop, he doesn't have real friends, there's like something going on, you better make sure the kid doesn't have guns. You better make sure, you need to see what they're doing on the internet. The same people are against guns are also against parents knowing what their kids are doing. And it's a really kind of a weird thing for me, like this idea of privacy. When you live in my house, when you're eating my food, when you're a minor, I have the ability to look over your shoulder on the internet and know what you're
Yes,
looking
ma'am.
at. And whether it's, whether it's porn or whatever it is. I mean, our Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, got berated because he had Net Nanny on his son's computer and phone to make sure the kid wasn't looking any place he shouldn't be. That's called protection,
Yeah,
right?
that's called parenting.
That's called parenting. That's what we do. And God bless my children, they're grown up now. And I was just bragging and I'm sorry, just 1 second about my kids. My son will be in the Army, and he graduates from college in May. He will be a second lieutenant in the Army. And my daughter works on Capitol Hill. She's married, no grandkids yet, but I'm hoping. But I gave them a little bit of money at Christmas to give. I wanted them to choose the charity, and my daughter chose a pregnancy care center locally, and my son chose the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews to help with the Israelis, and he wanted to support the IDF. So I was like, oh, thank God it wasn't something crazy. So
Well done. Well done,
yeah,
Mom.
thank you. I was patting myself on the back there. My great husband. And to this point, I guess, I am so grateful that I have a great husband. And it is really hard to raise children in today's world. And not everybody has the resources to go to private Christian school. I went to public school, and many of my friends sent their kids to public school. And they had to be on it all of us have to be on it every single minute, regardless whether you're homeschooling or whatever you're doing. And so I guess the only word I have is, first off, God sees and he loves us. And, and I know Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And so I would say to lean into Jesus in this hard minute, in this hard time, and get on your knees. If you haven't done it before, do it now. If you have done it before, do it again. I got on my knees by my children's cribs, and I gave them to the Lord, because it's so scary. It is a scary world that we're living in. And I said, God, I am ill-equipped as a mother, but will you just help me? I'll do my best, but I give them to you. And so we have to I'm going to have to keep doing that as my son enters the Army and enters the military in this scary time in world affairs. I don't know what's happening next, but I'm going to have to be on my knees, and I will. I'll be on my knees praying the Psalms for him, and I'm praying for my children and praying for a wife for him, by the way. And so I would just say to those moms, just stay on your knees for protection. But I also want to recognize how brave your law enforcement, the principal, how
Yeah.
everyone reacted in this moment. I could compare what happened to Iowa to other situations in other states where it did not work out like that. And so I am so heartbroken for this little sixth grader's family. I can't say enough, but I also, and I don't know how badly the others are injured, but I just want to give a great shout out and due respect and honor to your law enforcement people, your first responders, for this great principal who sacrificed his own body to protect those kids, as he should have. Other adults that acted, the training that had happened, of course, nobody wants to hear it could have been worse, but it could have been. And so none of us know when we walk out our front door what's going to happen for that day. What we have to do is, when we wake up, declare this the day of the Lord, give him our day, and in a resolute way every morning, try to walk out his spirit and his will and his grace, and ask for wisdom and strategies. And, again, constantly pray over our families, because I do believe as I said at the beginning, there is a spirit of violence that I believe has been poured out in a new way in this country. And I think we have to pray against that.
Amen. I don't know that I could say anything else. We just got to do an altar call, and that's it.
Then we'll
Way
take
to
up
go,
the
Penny.
offering.
Take up the offering. That's true. That's right. But that's absolutely true. And I think that's true. I mean, in the topic that we were originally going to talk about, the blight of human trafficking, the horrible crimes that are happening against vulnerable women, children. I mean, you talked about the weakening of the family unit and the destruction and the dysfunction there that's been going on for decades now. I think the enemy of our souls targets that, because he knows that strong families produce strong generations, and that God loves to see strong, happy families, husbands and wives working together, raising healthy children, and that's where the joy and the flourishing of life is supposed to come from. And he knows that, and he targets that with with severity. Just the number of times that I have seen women, and I know every situation is different, but I've spoken to women who have been trafficked, who have fallen into this, who were either very young or in a vulnerable place, and they found someone they thought would give them love. They thought someone would give them attention, or that lied to them, that deceived them, and that ended up putting them in, basically entrapping them. And that's one situation in which trafficking can happen. Many times it is very young people, or people from other countries that need opportunity, that are very desperate. And I mean, it is the worst kind of predation to look at that level of weakness and say, I can exploit that. I can use that body. That's horrible.
That's exactly right. You hit it on the head. Predators prey on the weak. And I grew up, I had a dad who was a pastor, and man, he was hardcore. And there's some things he didn't get right, by the way. But one thing that he did get right is he looked out for me. And anybody that was going to have anything to do with me or my brother had to look him in the eye. We live in a situation because Satan hates anything that God loves, right? And the reunion of a man and wife is a earthly picture of Christ's love for the church. So why, of course, Satan's going to attack that first. We know statistically, and this has always been the case, although the left doesn't like to talk about it, the safest place for a child is in a home with a mother and a father. That's just the reality of the situation. And so, yes, I am not trying to guilt anybody. I know, listen, I have good friends. I have divorce in my family. It happens. But it is important to try to keep that father-child relationship together if you're able to do that. If someone doesn't want to have anything to do with their kids, you can't make them, but you need to. Or you need to look for grandfathers. Strong men, daughters and sons need fathers. And the whole idea that the early, not the early feminists, the most recent feminist propaganda has told young women they don't need men. You can get a sperm donor, it's fine, leave him, you don't need to pay. And we are well educated. We don't really need a paycheck anymore. But kids still need a mom and a dad. They do need it. And so we need to, because statistically we know it's the safest place to bring them. But the truth is, predators look for the kid that is the weakest. The one whose mom is, bless her heart, working several jobs just trying to keep food on the table, or has God help them, an abusive family, and they are looking for love. I read a long form story about, I think it was the New York Times magazine, about Jeffrey Epstein. And boy, did it shed light on the situation. He was, before he died, however that is, he was a perverted sex addict who was also a sociopath. He was the most manipulative person I think I've read about in a long time, but it is pretty indicative of how this works. He would look for these young women, very young women, and he used an older woman to groom them to make it seem okay. But it was always young girls who needed something. They were poor. They had no father, no men in their lives, no good men. They were girls that had come over here as models, and models, we all think of, the supermodel who makes hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. That's not normal. That's just a very top 1%. The mass majority of young girls who model, they may be doing print modeling. Any catalog that you see has got a model in it. Maybe they're a runway model, but they only get paid per gig. So you got to do a lot of gigs in order to have a reasonable living. They didn't have necessarily a green card. They wanted to stay and they wanted to get citizenship. So he would dangle in front of them. He could get them a job. He was going to take care of them. He was going to make them safe. He would say things like, one girl that I read about wanted, she was like, I'm modeling right now, but I really want to have another job, and I want a long-term job. This is kind of a short-term thing that for anybody, because you age out of it. Right. I'd really like to work for the UN. And he promised her he was going to get her a job at the UN. So then what he would do, he was a billionaire. And by the way, there's not that many billionaires. And they mostly know each other if they're from New York or whatever. So he would get these meetings with other billionaires who wanted him to give to their charity or invest in their business or whatever it was. So he'd bring along these young girls to this meeting like, see, I know Bill Gates. I can get you a job, or I can keep you from getting a job. So then it went from I can help you till I'm going to harm you if you don't do what I want you to do. And so it is very, typical of what people do when they're grooming. They bring them along, they make them feel uncomfortable, whether it's like the inner city pimp that's, telling the girl to come into the gang and this is your family, we're going to love you, until then it's suddenly threats and we're going to harm you if you don't do what I say. And it's exactly how it works no matter what socioeconomic level it is. We know the State Department says there's about 6.1 million commercial trafficking happens every year, and we know about 1.3 million of those are children. That is the darkest of the dark. Of course, many people saw the movie The Sound of Freedom, which broke our hearts and helped us focus again on this issue that hasn't gone away. Slavery is real. It still is happening. It's not like it was in the early 1700s or until after the abolition movement, but it's real and it's still happening. Human beings are sold. Little children are sold. Their pictures are sold. They're harmed over and over again. Even if the pictures, they're even sometimes age out of it, but those pictures are out there forever. I've heard stories from Department of Justice of how they've had to go to people who are grown up now and say, is this you? And every time it happens, it's like damaging, traumatizing these people. But it's happening every year. These children from poor countries are sold to a lot of them through the internet, but also sometimes in person, to a lot of Americans, wealthy Canadians, Westerners are preying on these children. And so we need to recognize this. And there's something called the TVPA, which is the Trafficking in Persons Office that was created under, wait for this, Bill Clinton.
Wow.
Under
That's
our
irony.
State Department, yes, it is, who was mentioned 50 times in the Epstein articles in the actual documents. He flew on what they called the Flying Lolita, which was Jeffrey Epstein's plane, which he used to bring young girls in to meet with wealthy men on his private island. Bill Clinton flew on that a bunch of times. I don't know how many, but it was numerous times, more than 10.
Mm.
And on several of those occasions, this is what I found the most telling, he got rid of his Secret Service detail on the flight. So I think that's very
He didn't want
interesting.
any witnesses. Oh.
He didn't want any. So, but, and then you have other people that were mentioned, like in this, what the document that came out was, and this is what people are kind of thinking about and talking about, was some court documents in which one of the girls sued over how she was abused. And one of those people was Prince Andrew, of course. But they asked her, who all did you meet? And so Jeffrey Epstein was flying around the world meeting with other billionaires all over the place. The vast majority of the people that the names come out aren't being accused of anything illegal. But there are others that were. And and others that you wonder about, especially when you hear that their name was mentioned 50 times.
Sure.
But all that to say, in my article, and people tend to want to look at, that is really important, because what we need to understand is sex trafficking is real and it's still happening, even though people tried to discredit that movie. I don't understand why. And we have to have a new abolition movement of zero tolerance. Zero tolerance. That means if you are a pimp and you're trafficking women, you should go to prison for life. If you are a John and you are buying young women or children or boys, you need to go to prison for life. We have to have zero tolerance. If you are a country who are turning a blind eye, and that happens, there needs to be sanctions, not just a list. There's a naughty list that the State Department puts out. No, I'm talking things like real sanctions with teeth. And us as a country say, no, we are done with this. This is the most depraved, evil thing that I can think of, is that you would harm a little child. We will not stand for this. And I think as the church, this is our time to say, we must stand against this and say no more.
Yeah. Amen to all of that. I think those are great ideas from a policy perspective. I think at a state level as well, you can start looking at making sure that our borders are safe, and that if there's any known traffickers that are coming into contact with our, using our state. We have 2 major interstates that intersect right in our capital city. And so the blight of trafficking is all over that. There are so many people that just, use that to literally truck people across, vulnerable women and children across our state. And while that's known about, they aren't always caught. And so I think there are ways that we can act locally too. And that if, even just personally, preparing your family, being a strong family and protecting your kids and knowing what's going on, knowing what influences they're entertaining in their world, what's happening through those tiny little screens.
That's right.
If it's in your house, you need to know what's going on. That's called parenting, my friends. And that's a way to protect your kids especially. And I think we have to be in prayer for this, but we also have to raise our voices, which is exactly what you're doing. Penny, it's been wonderful to have you with us. I know you got to go, but I really appreciate your time. And again, all the brave and bold stands that you've been taking, and the fact that you're encouraging other women, especially, to stand up and to speak the truth boldly in wherever we find ourselves. I think there's a lot of women that minimize that, and they think, well, I can't really make a difference, or I've got a lot of little things to do. What difference is that going to make? It makes a huge difference, because if we all speak together, that's when the world changes.
It's just the opposite. You're so right. I always say messenger matters. And we are at a moment in our nation's history where I truly believe that God is calling Christian women to be the Esthers of our generation, whether it's on the issue of trafficking, whether it's on the issue of life, whether it's on the unique dignity of women. It is a mom that stands at the school board meeting and says, absolutely no pornography in my kid's class. I'm not having it. A man cannot share my daughter's locker room. I'm not having it. My son needs to be protected. I'm not having it. And so I really believe we have this outsized opportunity. We have a moment where courageous women have to stand up. And we're preaching the choir, because the women that are listening to you and the men are the ones who are already here with us. But we want to help at Concerned Women for America them to be even more more enabled with
Mhm.
data and the statistics and the, and training to be able to speak into this moment. And then, of course, we have our Young Women for America chapters. Oh my goodness, head blown. These women are so brave, so courageous. They've been leading, Rebecca, on their college campuses, prayer vigils for Israel. Think
Mm.
about that. At the very time where this sort of anti-Semitism is rearing its ugly head the most, we have young women who are standing up and saying, absolutely not, and inviting the Jewish students to come with them and praying over them. So I'm very proud of what our young women are doing, and we want to help more women, equip them to lead, because I believe it's absolutely essential at this moment.
Amen to all of that. Keep up the great work, Penny Nance,
You
our
too.
excellent guest from Concerned Women for America. I'll link to that article that we referenced down below so you can read it for yourself. It's over at the Federalist, and you can keep track of all of her columns. She's a busy lady. Keep it coming. Keep the hits coming, because we absolutely need you on that wall, and we wish for many more happy warriors to join you in this fight.
Mhm.
This is our time, and this is
Can
what
I
we're
add
here
one last
for.
thing? Like,
Absolutely.
I'd love for you people to come and sign up. We send alerts out every week to concernwomen.org. So come do that and follow us on our so all of our social media. I have social media seated. We're everywhere. So just track us and we'll help keep you up to date with what's going
Sounds
on the
great. That's
national level.
concernedwomen.org.
Yes, it is.
All right, great place to go and sign up so that you can stay informed, stay equipped, so that we can stay free and happy here in America for this country that we love. Penny, God bless.
God bless. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to FaithWorks Live. Like I said, I'll post all relevant links down below. If you're listening on the radio, you got to check out the podcast so that you don't miss anything. And until next time, you're listening to FaithWorks Live, where we have a motto and a mission. That is to love God, to serve people, and to live free.